For over a century, the FPA has stood as a beacon of thoughtful, nonpartisan engagement in global affairs. Since our founding, our mission has remained constant to promote open dialogue, informed understanding, and constructive discourse on the issues that shape our world. We take pride in our independence and have long provided a trusted space where diverse perspectives can come together across the aisle and across borders to exchange ideas, deepen knowledge, and strengthen the democratic process. In today's polarized world, this mission is more vital than ever. Throughout FPA's history, we have welcomed leaders and thinkers from all corners of the globe, statesmen, diplomats, economists, and scholars, each contributing to the conversation that aims to build bridges where others may see only division. Tonight is no exception, as Governor Villeroy represents the highest caliber of public service at a time when central banks play an increasingly crucial role in global economic diplomacy. It is especially meaningful to welcome Governor Villeroy. We will resume the program after dinner has been served. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium the chairman of the Foreign Policy Association, Henry Fernandez, who also happens to be the chairman and CEO of MSCI, and truly one of the great public-spirited leaders of New York City, Henry Fernandez.
Yeah, if you don't know it, this is the best table of the house here. You know, you go around and you ask, one of these students, what do they do? And say, I'm a PhD in computational biology. I'm at Stanford University and trying to decide, what to do from a former banker. And I'm a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies, I think it was. Anyhow, so when you listen to those stories and you see these people, you definitely get a very strong confidence in the future of the world. Right. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us as well. On behalf of the entire Foreign Policy Association team, we are enormously grateful to have so many thoughtful, impressive, and generous people supporting our cause, which is the cause for the world and the cause for freedom and the cause for independent thinking in a debate about many issues in the world. As all of you know, the Foreign Policy Association prides itself of being a non-partisan forum to hear the points of view of different people from different perspectives, different walks of life, so it can inform our thinking, our views of the world, and hopefully, change our way of life in a positive way. Please know how much we truly appreciate all you do to make these events possible. As I said, for those of you who were at last night's FPA dinner, I always hate to interrupt the dinner table conversations. And Noel gets very excited to be with all of you, so I have to go tap on him and say, it's getting late, we got to get going, right? Because it's so difficult to interrupt engaging discussions that happen at our table. But of course, we want to make sure we give plenty of time to hear our distinguished honoree who arrived this morning, and therefore it's about 3 o'clock in the morning right now for him. But he's holding up well, without coffee and without alcohol. So that's a pretty big achievement. Before I introduce him, I would like to say a quick word about tonight's overarching topic, which is the importance of monetary policy, especially during periods of global turmoil, and especially during the current environment that we're facing in the world. Again, those of you who attended last night's dinner had the privilege of hearing from Governor Chang Yong Rhee of the Bank of Korea, Bank of South Korea, not North Korea. As Governor Rhee emphasized to all of us, central bank independence from political influence and even fiscal influence is especially critical at all times, but more importantly, in stressful periods in which obviously the politicians want you to do what they want to do, and a lot of that is printing money and lower rates, which could lead to disastrous consequences. Additionally, Governor Rhee also emphasized in his view that the volatility in capital flows and exchange rates has created a significant number of new challenges for economies whose currencies are not reserve currencies of the world, which is most of the U.S. The economies in the globe. So central bankers in those economies whose currencies are not reserve often have trouble achieving price and financial stability through traditional monetary alone, and therefore have to turn to additional tools such as foreign exchange intervention and capital flow management. So in my business, in my company, we are the advisor of what's a country that is a developed market, an emerging market, a frontier market. And of course, Korea is classified as an emerging market because of a lot of issues not having to do with this economy. So I had the pleasure of meeting today with certain Korean officials. I had the chance to talk to the central bank governor last night. And I was trying to convince him to make the won, the Korean won, totally convertible in all financial markets of the world. Good luck. And again, because of this issue of how to make sure you have a properly valued currency, and how do you manage your exchange rate, and how do you manage stability of your cash flows, and in their case, obviously, make sure they have a lot of things to export at the proper prices. So in normal times, of course, most people pay very little attention to monetary policy, except for a few, people like us, like me, some of you, that you follow, what central bankers do. But for that matter, U.S. dollar status as the global reserve currency in the world has long given American policymakers leverage and flexibility that foreign counterparts of theirs could only wish for. However, these are not normal times. As we know, the position of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is gradually being challenged, and potentially some of the policies currently today could make that go faster. As I said, more and more people are questioning whether the dollar should retain its status as a reserve currency, and how the current volatility will affect, even more importantly, the $37 trillion of U.S. Treasury bonds trading in the marketplace. So these are enormous issues that are being discussed in Washington, among Washington and many countries around the world. And there is the IMF and World Bank meetings coming up starting tomorrow, which I normally say I hope is the most exciting meeting of the IMF and the World Bank in the recent past and in the future, because if it's more exciting than this week, it's going to be trouble for the world. So given the magnitude of all these debates that are happening and the heightened levels of economic and financial uncertainty and the tough decisions facing central bankers, tonight's honoree is a really fitting choice for the FPA Statesman Dinner. As a fourth-generation Frenchman that I am, even though I don't speak French, but my family's roots from my mother's side came from Marseille, France, and two of my kids are French names, I am deeply honored and privileged to present to all of you today François Villeroy de Galhau. Good? Good for a, now he's a Frenchman? You notice that Noel had no problem pronouncing it, so I got to take some French lessons from Noel when we're waiting for events to happen, right, Noel? The governor has been governor of the Banque of France since November of 2015. Almost 10 years. In monetary policy days, central bankers lasting that long nowadays that's a very long period of time. So he has accumulated enormous knowledge, experience, has played a key role in shaping European economic policy through multiple crises and external shocks. When he first took the job, central bankers were still dealing with the aftermath of the global financial crisis and the European debt crisis. A lot of people forget the European debt crisis, but in those days, remember, we were watching the parliament in Greece, in Athens, play on TV. A few years later, of course, COVID-19 spawned a truly unprecedented monetary challenge. I mean, economic an economic lockdown and other pandemic restrictions. Even before the pandemic had officially ended, the governor and his colleagues were forced to address the historic inflation surge that erupted in 2021, the inflation spike that was exacerbated by Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. And of course, it remains a top economic, political, and financial and energy issue in Western Europe and in the world. More recently, of course, the governor has been grappling with the consequences of some tariff battles and a potential global trade war. So that's no small task that we want to hear about. A little bit of background here. François joined the French Treasury more than 35 years ago. In the early 1990s, 1900s, no, it's a little bit too long, right? In the early 1990s, he became European advisor to the French Minister of Finance and Prime Minister. Later in the same decade, he served as Chief of Staff for the French Minister of Economy, Finance, and Industry. In the early 2000s, he became head of the French General Tax Directorate. And then he became CEO of Statesman, the French bank, a subsidiary of BNP Paribas. He later served as Chief Operating Officer of BNP Paribas before taking office at the Banque of France, as I said, in November 1, 2025, for a 6-year term. He did a great job because he was reappointed for another 6-year term that ends, that the first ended in the year 2021, and now he's serving another 6-year term or somewhere around that. So beyond the role at the Banque of France, he also serves on the governing council of the European Central Bank and as chair of the Bank of International Settlements Board of Directors. And that's almost like the central bank of central banks. They all gather in Basel to discuss the events in the world. So he has that perspective as well. So I'm deeply honored to present to you Governor, François Villeroy de Galhau, the Foreign Policy Association Medal, on behalf of the association and all of our members here. Congratulations.
So, Mr. Chairman, dear Henri, Mr. President, dear Noel, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Mr. Chairman, you did my job, because you had these wonderful remarks about monetary policy, which I share 100%, so I could stop there and going with my medal. But I would like really to thank you for this wonderful evening in New York City. As you said, as I left Paris this morning, it's 3 o'clock in the morning for me. And believe me, only such a friendly and prestigious dinner could keep me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. I am very grateful to you, Noel, and to the board of directors of the FPA for organizing this event, for awarding me this medal. It really strikes a chord with me, as I will explain, and even more today, when our transatlantic ties are so unfortunately under stress. But let me first express my very special gratitude. I am both honored and humbled to be included among the distinguished recipients of the FPA Medal. These include prominent central bankers such as the late Paul Volcker and Jean-Claude Trichet of the European Central Bank, and one of my predecessors and friends, I could add, at the Banque de France. But as I said, this medal has also a very personal resonance. I discovered in depth your wonderful country in March 1990 during a month-long trip of 15 so-called young European leaders. I must confess, at that time, I was very sensitive to the word leaders. Seen from today, I am more sensitive to the word young, in young European leaders. But the United States welcomed us with open arms, taking us from this beautiful city of New York to Seattle, and from Detroit to Raleigh, North Carolina. I will never forget. This was a time of hope, 4 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. This was a time of mutual trust across the Atlantic, built on the victory of freedom and democracy. This trip left me with a lasting friendship and admiration for the American people. Beyond this personal dimension, I like to think that this medal is a testament to the common values and principles that your association and, yes, the central banking community both strive to uphold. Let me stress one of these common values: dialogue. Your association was founded at the end of World War I by Americans committing, and it was seen in the clip, committing to creating closer ties between nations, notably through your famous World Leadership Forum. This dialogue, which we cherish as central bankers, is especially important at a time when multilateralism is experiencing an unprecedented crisis. Hence, let me speak here tonight not only as a French governor, but as a committed friend of your country and a dedicated European. How can we today restore trust across the Atlantic? I think it's more crucial than ever, and I would like to elaborate on 3 simple ideas or suggestions. A, to tell the truth. B, to fully assess the damage of a trade war, which you mentioned. And C, to open the way for a possible positive dialogue, and I think there is still a way. Let me start with the truth. we Europeans heard with surprise, you are aware of that, some weeks ago that, sorry to quote, the EU was created to screw the US, unquote. With due respect, let me, and with some gravity, let me recall history. The EU was created after World War II to lastingly and successfully reestablish peace, democracy, and the market economy in Europe. Peace, democracy, and market economy. These are three key American values which your wonderful association embodies. And the EU was legitimately founded with American support and not against America, as was the French-German reconciliation, so difficult, yet so decisive. Furthermore, it's important to set the record straight on economics. No, international trade is not a zero-sum game, where one country's gain is necessarily another country's loss. On the contrary, it is the most effective way to prosper together by exchanging goods and services, ideas, talent, and innovation. And yes, our transatlantic bond is deep, balanced, and mutually beneficial. The US and the EU are the world's two largest economies, maintaining one of the largest bilateral economic relationships. True, the EU runs a trade in goods surplus with the US of $234 billion in 23. But our services deficit, on the opposite, has widened substantially, 125 billion US dollar in 23. And if you had net primary income flows in favor of US firms, term bond yields, and a broad-based, mostly composed of investment income such as profits and asset returns, they also offset the trade in goods surplus. This ultimately leads to a balanced current account. The effective applied tariffs between the EU and the US were close before recent developments. And let me remind here the obvious. Value-added tax, VAT, is not a customs duty. It is levied on the final value of imported and domestically produced goods equally, like the sales tax in the US. EU and US firms have long established a robust investment presence in each other's market. European majority-owned affiliates directly employed more than 5 million US workers last year. Last figure, European-based investors play a crucial role in the strength of the US economy, representing close to 50% of all foreign holdings of US securities in 2023. No economic relationship is as strong, as old, and as balanced as ours. All these positive figures bring me to the possible damage of a trade war. And we are all aware that it's huge. The new measures announced, as well as the increasing unpredictability, constitute a major shock to the global economy, still more significant than other shocks which, Henry, you mentioned in my last decade. But first and foremost, a negative shock to the US economy. And I say it with sadness, really with sadness. According to convergent analysis by most US and international banks and today published by the IMF, as you probably saw. The US could suffer in 25 from an average estimated loss of around 1 percentage point in annual growth and a similar size rise in underlying inflation. There are even talks of a possible US recession, which was unthinkable 3 months ago. But bad news for the US is bad news for all, including for Europe. According to preliminary assessments, it could be, in the case of Europe, a direct negative impact of at least 0.25 percentage point to euro area GDP this year. The impact on inflation remains more uncertain, but could be, as a whole, on the downside, differently from the US. Our baseline scenario for France and for the euro area remains that of an exit from inflation, returning to our 2% target this year, without a recession. One word about financial markets. They reacted very negatively to this trade announcement, with the very unusual combination of a sharp drop in US equity indexes, a rise, which was unusual, in US long-term bond yields, and a broad-based decline in the US dollar value. I will not repeat what you said about monetary policy, and I understand you had an excellent presentation by my friend and colleague Shang-Yong Ray yesterday evening. So to have 2 different speeches for 2 evenings on monetary policy would probably be too much. But the economic uncertainty may possibly threaten financial stability. And this is my point. Such deeply negative financial effects would also result from attacks on the independence and credibility of central banks, as we saw very recently, with happily more positive news today. Dear Henry, you reminded me during dinner of a famous sentence by a famous central banker, Alan Greenspan. The first contribution to the economy is from central banks and from political authorities is to inject confidence. Injecting confidence rather than destroying it, sorry to say, this would be a good program. Let me be clear. I don't mean that the latest globalization wave was a fairy tale. It had its problems and its imbalances, both social and financial. But the current lose-lose game, I say it again with sadness, will obviously increase its problems and in no way solve them. This brings me to my last consideration. Is there a way for a possible positive dialogue? I still hope there is. And let me share 3 more positive reflections to conclude. First, let us use the 90-day pause to seriously talk. The least economically harmful option would be indeed to negotiate. A bold European proposal, 0 for 0 tariffs for industrial goods, is already on the table. And then desescalate the situation rather than setting off a transatlantic spiral of tariff hikes. So far, Europeans have reacted in a remarkably united and calm manner. The European Commission has prepared a series of retaliatory measures in case it would be unfortunately needed, but it has deferred wisely its application. It's also, let me stress it, in Europe's interest to maintain open trade ties with a maximum amount of partners from the Americas to Asia. increasing the number of balanced free trade agreements, including Mercosur, is a strategic priority. Second, and this is on our side of the Atlantic, Europe and France also need to become stronger. The only positive I see in this situation, as said already last November with my German colleague Joachim Nagel, it's a wake-up call for Europe. This is, of course, the case in terms of defense, but also in economic matters, where we have the duty and the means to better master our own destiny. We need what I could call a general mobilization, focused on three imperatives, three eyes. I will come back to them. Taking the best of the impressive economic success of your country. Or, if you prefer, instead of three eyes, size multiplied by muscle multiplied by speed. What do I mean? First, we need to integrate our single market more. This means playing on its size, as large in GDP terms as the US, by removing internal barriers in several areas such as services and energy. Second eye, we also need to invest better, giving priority to the most promising breakthrough innovations, and particularly those related to AI. To succeed, we need to build financial muscle through a genuine, what we call savings and investment union, fostering more our abundant private savings towards equity and venture capital. We don't lack capital, we lack equity and capital markets. Finally, we need to innovate faster. Europe needs simplification, less bureaucracy, fewer procedures, shorter deadlines. But simplification is not deregulation. We will remain firm on the objectives while being more nimble in design. To successfully implement these imperatives, integrate more, invest better, innovate faster, we urgently need, we Europeans, a binding, visible, and not too distant calendar. Such a calendar will mobilize all our political and economic forces, as did in the past the 1st of January 93 for the single market and the 1st of January 99 for the single currency. Third hope, Europe and the US can still commit to what I call a pragmatic multilateralism. What do I mean? A multilateralism which is more focused on some practical themes of common interest. Let me name just a few, and I strongly hope we still share these aims. Financial stability, cross-border payments and crypto assets, cybersecurity, the fight against financial crime, and the prevention of extreme climate events. Let us preserve the multilateral institutions, such as the IMF, where I will be tomorrow, and the World Bank, born and hosted in this great country, but with more focused ambitions. I will conclude by quoting another French citizen, a very famous one, great friend of America, Alexis de Tocqueville. And you all recall his influential work, Democracy in America, which played, by the way, a very important role in developing democracy also in my own country. I quote him, "There is nothing more fruitful in wonders than the art of being free." Among many shared transatlantic values, freedom is the cardinal one. It has been the driving force behind America's outstanding economic performance. But this treasure of freedom is never a given. Let us fight for it when necessary. Let us continue as much as possible to cultivate it together through trade, innovation, and robust dialogue. Thank you for your attention.
Governor Villeroy, that was a very insightful set of remarks, and you mentioned two individuals that we take very seriously at FPA. Alexis de Tocqueville also observed that the new colonies, this new country, took very seriously the art of association. And we like to think that we perpetuate that very important aspect of American society at the Foreign Policy Association. He also observed that foreign policy was the weak suit of a democracy because autocracies have greater continuity in their foreign policies, and it puts us at a disadvantage at times. But with an informed public, we can overcome those disadvantages. And you mentioned Alan Greenspan. He was a recipient of our medal, and when we presented it to him, he observed that as a young economist, he rarely took into account developments around the world, but that as chairman of the Federal Reserve, he rarely makes decisions or rarely made decisions without taking into account external developments, and urged us to continue to hold meetings such as this one. So we are very honored to bestow our medal upon you. And as an honorary fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, we hope you will stay in contact with us. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Get home safe, and we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Thank you.